Hey, everybody. Great to be with you. Hope you are doing great. If you're new with us, my name is Jeff. I'm one of the pastors here, and I got to tell you, I am so grateful you decided to join us. Now, however you're joining us, however you might be tuning in, I just want to say, again, maybe you're a little bit kind of curious about what we're all about, what's going on at Harbor Point in that sense. And so let me just tell you, this is a group of people who believe with a great deal of conviction that we were made for life with Jesus, but that itself, as great as it isn't always happening in straight lines. In fact, we say often that we often need each other to kind of move each other forward a little bit, and because like life is what it is. It isn't always like what we hope it would be, and so the best gift we have to each other is the church, which is really us looking at each other, going, "You needed a little help, and I'm right here for you." So, however you came in today, you're around great people, and however you're kind of maybe investigating some stuff, you just be at ease. This isn't a place where everybody's got all the answers and got it all figured out. So breathe a little bit, exhale. We got some stuff to talk about, but man, I'm really glad that you decided to join us. Now, today, so I'll just jump right into it. When I was over the last couple of days, kind of following Christmas and that kind of time, and even when the rain was really bad, even kind of following the Christmas season, there was just watching a lot more movies. I was just kind of at home. I wasn't feeling good for a little bit of it, so I was sitting in front of the TV, watching a lot more movies, and it just sort of prompted some thinking a little bit. I was like, what's really the difference between like a villain and a hero? If you think about those kind of things, and a villain, at least to a certain, I mean, this is the most general sense, but you could probably kind of agree with me. A villain is at the simplest form. The villain is a taker in all of these kinds of movies, whatever it might be, or it's called a book too, right? So the villain is a taker. The hero, on the other hand, obviously is some form of a giver. That this is a heroic quality. Now, one of the things that you could kind of summarize this is that a hero is someone sacrificing themselves for others, and a villain simply sacrifices others for themselves. Might be the simplest way to say it. But the hero, not only is the hero a giver, the hero also recognizes something in themselves, or at least they're alerted to something within themselves that they must change. That for them to accomplish whatever it is they're going to accomplish, which is presumably to defeat whatever villain they're up against, they've got to try to find a way to change from where they are now. And the challenge, of course, is that they don't, in the effort to defeat whatever villain they're up against, their changing doesn't result in them becoming the villain. How do they defeat the villain without becoming the villain? But a villain, on the other hand, obviously, again, if we're working with these opposites, a villain is someone who is at least change resistant or change averse, who is saying, everything's kind of working for me the way that it ought, and everything around me ought to change. So there's rarely do you see a villain admitting kind of a shortfall, a need for transformational change. Now, the only exception in some cases, well, let's say it this way. In a horror movie or in most sort of really kind of sci-fi action films, most of the time a villain is never admitting that they need change. There are, of course, some instances where a villain, that's part of the heroes, actually their effort is to change the villain, but for the most part, a villain's got kind of a picture like I'm kind of dialed in, and the world around me needs to adapt to me at all costs. With me? So one guy, a guy named Howard Suber, who wrote a book called The Power of Film, he says it this way about villains, interestingly enough. He says, heroes are never perfect, but villains often are. The title character in The Terminator can't be stopped, and no matter how badly it is injured, it heals itself and keeps on going. The title character in Alien is a perfect organism, and so too is the title character in Jaws, who's described as a, quote, perfect eating machine. Their perfection is often what makes villains fascinating. He continues. What ultimately differentiates the villain from the hero is that villains act totally on behalf of their own self-interest, which of course they believe to be perfect, whereas heroes act on behalf of other people or a cause. Now, the bottom line, at least one way to think about this, is the bottom line of what separates a villain from a hero is how they handle their wants, how they handle what they want. Now, last week we started a series really based on the premise. And again, to remind you again, this is a series. We have multiple weeks to sort of talk about some of this stuff. There'll still be some stuff that might be a little bit incomplete for you today. Particularly, there's going to be some things that I'm leaving out on purpose, but just because of time. But we started a series last week, which was based on the premise that every single one of us has a need to be, which is to be identified who we are, wherever we are right now, be permission to be that. But also, every one of us also has a need to become something. Then when we really get honest, there's a part of us we go, I am where I am right now, but I'm not perfect. I'm in need of some transformation. In fact, we just kind of talked about how the whole group is a group of people who are not perfect and who don't have all the answers. So I'm trying to become something else. Again, you may not be sure about Jesus, about whether or not he has a role in that, or whatever that might mean. But every single one of us has both of these needs, to be what I am right now, but also to become something different. We showed also that the Bible kind of doesn't have any conflict with this idea. The Bible says this in Psalm 139, you created my inmost being. This is a prayer by a guy named David. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Here's what I am. But then there's also, as we talked about, this idea that there's a part of this person, David, who's also aware there may not be things that are yet what they ought to be. Meaning there's a part of him that needs to be transformed. Skipping down a few verses in the same passage. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Now, you could kind of characterize this idea as, at least to kind of take one more step, is that there's a gap between who I am right now and who I'm intending to become. There's a gap between who I am now and who I'm intending to become. Every one of us lives with that kind of gap. Now, last week, what we talked about with this regard is, even in this sort of, I don't know, under this umbrella, you could say to a certain extent, we asked the question, what is it that I'm doing? All of these things that I'm doing that were talked about last week as being largely unconscious. What is it that what I'm doing, my habits, my unconscious patterns, what is it that I'm doing to me? Because as we've been kind of uncovering this, we're finding out that we're actually becoming something we may not even be aware of or intending to become at all. That's actually what's sort of happening to us as we're talking about being and becoming. More often than not, we're being formed by things and by forces we aren't even intending for them to happen. So the goal, at least for these first couple weeks of this series, is to begin a kind of intervention into what we're becoming by paying attention to what that looks like. So how we live, essentially, is an interplay between these three things: our habits, our character, and our loves or our wants. So another way to say it is the interaction, the constant reciprocal, like feedback loop between what we do, who we are, and what it is that we love. All of them are informing the other. James K.A. Smith says this in his book, and this might look familiar to you. He says this: to be human is to be animated and oriented by some vision of the good life, some picture of what we think counts as flourishing. And we want that. We crave it. We desire it. This is why our most fundamental mode of orientation to the world is love. He continues, we are oriented by our longings and directed by our desires. We adopt ways of life that are indexed to such visions of the good life, not usually because we think through our options, but rather because some picture captures our imagination. To say it a little bit differently, that there's the human ability, the uniquely human ability, is to imagine a better future, which is aligned with our wants. In other words, there's a part of us that can picture the way things ought to be, and it's usually either influenced by or it is characterized by our own wants, in some translation, or some ways to think about it as the word, our loves. Now, to go back to this again, this vision of the future that's kind of a reflection of our own wants, characterized by our wants, fueled by them, whatever. To go back to that idea, a villain has a vision of sort of a good life vision as well. And it's just the cost that's whatever's between them and their vision is sort of irrelevant. This is why people are kind of often destroyed in their path or whatever, but their path is characterized typically by a blind ambition that is controlled by their wants. So their blind ambition is controlled by their wants. And what we all universally agree, when we're watching a movie or reading a story in which a villain is operating in that particular way, there's universal agreement that this cannot be allowed. This person has to be stopped. In fact, we're looking for the hero to do the job that we wish would happen, which is that this person could be stopped, that there would be something put in the way of their own blind ambition for their wants and their actual execution of that vision. Make sense? Now, we're all about that, but our own wants, we tend to be a little bit more generous with. We're reasonable. We're kind. We're definitely not letting them get out of control like this villain. But in every movie and every story, the villain is always the warning about what happens when wants go unchecked, when they go kind of crazy, when they run amok. And we always say our wants are reasonable. They're great. They're noble. They're good. I'm not like them. Of course we would, because we're wonderful. Now, let's talk about that for a second. We'll come back to it in a couple different ways. But first, I want to talk about the idea that there is a kind of wants mythology in our culture. Okay, the first one is this, that wants are sacred because we don't choose them. They're operating on a different plane. We didn't choose our wants chose us, if you take my meaning. To say it another way is that you could almost say about the wants that we have that they're actually, because we didn't choose them, they belong on a different level, a different plane. It's almost like they're divine, which means to push that all the way further out, whatever wants that we have, this is a culturally accepted kind of thing in a lot of cases. It means it's almost, our wants are almost unchallengeable because they're from God. However, whatever I want must be good because I didn't choose it. It must be from God. It's part of how I was knit together in my inmost being, like we just read. Right? That's how a lot of us understand it. Secondly, is that wants, we tend to think that they're guided by a particular kind of thinking. Like I've thought a particular thing, I've reasoned myself into a particular way of wanting some stuff, and so my wants are the outflow or the product of the things that I am thinking. Now, almost all the research says that's not true. Almost all the research just says, no, we kind of got that wrong. We want that to be true, but it's not. The psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, secular psychologist, he says this. He says essentially that the relationship between our conscious sort of directing of our lives is like an elephant with a rider on top. And the rider is kind of believing that that person is in control, but really the elephant is the decider. In fact, he actually says that the mind, his term is, it's like a press secretary for decisions that have already been made. Like we've already decided a thing based on our wants. We're going a direction, and the mind is like, let me tell you why that makes perfect sense. So we're already going in a direction. Let me show you why everything that we thought we were doing now is why I can make this make sense. Because every single one of us, all of us, have a built-in preoccupation with being or appearing right, at least to ourselves. All of us have this. But we have an obvious problem. Because all of us know that not all of our wants that we've gotten have led us to the life that we wanted. Let me say that again. All of us, the obvious problem is that all of us know that all of our wants, not every one of them, all of the wants that we've gotten, not every one of them have given us the life that we wanted. We had a vision for the good life, and our wants kind of pointed us down that direction, and they didn't, and they don't always deliver. And we know this because all of us, every single one of us, has had the experience with regret. Regret is simply the admission that what the outcome of whatever my choices have been is not what I really wanted way down deep. I wish I hadn't had done. I wish I didn't go down this road. When it comes to wants, perhaps one of the best definitions of this, although you'll see the word loves here, which will make sense. So imagine this interchangeably. But Augustine says it this way in Confessions, among other places he writes this, but the essence of sin, kind of really living outside of what God intended, the essence of sin is simply disordered love, disordered wants. It's disordered loves. The essence of sin is just a matter of having the wants in the wrong order. Now, to kind of recharacterize this a little bit, our wants fall into two essential categories, and you'll get the idea here. There's better ways to describe this, I understand that, but let me just give you, at least from a practical understanding, our wants fall into two categories. The wants I already have, which is like my base impulses. No one had to tell me this. I don't have to be influenced this. It's chocolate ice cream for sure. But then there are also the wants I want to have. Those are our best intentions, which, you get the picture there. On the one hand, there's the things I don't have to try to want that I already want, base impulses. That's wants I already have. And then there's the wants I want to have. Like if I could live the way I really should, whatever that looks like in your own life, again, we'll talk about that, coming weeks. But however that is that you think you should live, it's like, that's the one we want to live up to. I'll give you an example. This is actually kind of a literal example of this food example, but I took my sons, I think I mentioned this, took them on a road trip. And so it's just me and my boys. And, my boys could pretty much just eat Skittles and, Mountain Dew. And they'd be like, that's fine. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. But I was like, I got to kind of be responsible. And they're 17 and 22 and they have real appetites. And so I was like, okay, before we get to this little, VRBO we're heading to, let's go to Walmart. We'll get some food. We'll get it all together. And we'll literally try to do the best that we can to make this be somewhat kind of a balanced meal, right? So I got some chicken and, it was already cooked, so I don't have to worry about that. And then I got some rolls. I made chicken sandwiches. I got like a bag of salad. I know my wife would be impressed. We got a bag of salad. I bought a box of mac and cheese, and I bought a Marie Callender's pie. So I could I was like, let's have pie. Who eats pie? So I made a pie, I heated it up. Then I took it out while I was making the rest of dinner. It was cooling off. It was wonderful. And I'm making dinner and it's great. And I'm like, we're all hungry and we're eating a bunch of it. It was so fun. And you would think that of all of the things that we made, the one thing we would have no self-control over would be the pie. And it was really good. It was great. But the thing I had no I just want to tell you, I was powerless against it, was not the pie. It was the macaroni and cheese. It was box cheap macaroni and cheese. I was like a hyena on a gazelle. It was like, I was ravenous. It was like we're like, anybody else want? I'm trying not to eat like that. I'm coming off of all of the stuff we all ate between Thanksgiving and New Year's, where I'm trying to, tone it down a bit. But I'm like, I'm like, anybody else want some of this? Either you boys want some of this? And I'm trying to throw it away, and I'm convincing myself I have the big spoon that I served it with. I'm like eating this thing as I'm leaning over the trash to try to put it in the trash. And I'm like, as I'm throwing it away, I'm like sad a little bit. And I just cannot help myself. It's so gross. I literally thought to myself, this is a confession. I literally thought to myself, would it be that gross? I did put the bag in the trash. If I just ate it out of, I know, I'm just, I get it. No judgment. I understand. But this is what I was thinking. Now, what I want to be in my life, I want to be the kind of person, here's my goal. I want to be the kind of person, see if you relate, who controls their wants, but who is not controlled by their wants. I want to be the kind of person who controls their wants, like you can want macaroni and cheese, but who is not ravenously hanging over the trash can, contemplating the like moral and ethical and even like sort of sanitary implications of like dipping into the trash and going for it again. It's disgusting. So anyway, the point is, this is not about macaroni and cheese, whether or not you should eat it. It's about freedom from its power over me. Are you with me? Which means this whole conversation about wants is really essentially a dotted line, in some cases a bold line, to the word freedom over slavery. It's not about mac and cheese, it's about freedom from its power over me. Now, in the Bible, there is in the part of the Bible, Jesus' ministry, which was written in Greek, there's a Greek word, a concept called dikaiosune. Now, that word in most literally gets translated, and there's a Hebrew equivalent too for the Hebrew Bible, but the Greek version literally translates into this word righteousness. Now, what we hear, especially in the context of wants, we hear a couple of things. Most of us will hear this. Most of us, when we hear the word righteousness, we think of two things. Number one, we think that's pretty much not achievable. Like righteousness is a dream and it's a wonderful thought or whatever. And that's for a lot of us who grew up in the church. For those of us who did not grow up in the church, the idea of someone claiming or pursuing righteousness, most of the time we connect righteousness with self-righteousness because we've had interactions with people who are like, listen, I'm the righteous one and you got to be like me, or there's some level of blindness to the idea of whatever's going on in their life and all that kind of stuff. And so the idea of righteousness has kind of been abandoned because it's either unachievable or it's sort of connected to something else called self-righteousness. Now, for a lot of people in their first meeting of Jesus, either the first encounter with Jesus or the idea of Jesus, there's generally an assumption. The general assumption is this. Okay, what I'm doing, I know there's stuff I'm doing I'm not ought to be doing. For sure, I ought not to be doing it. And our assumption is that Jesus meets us and is generally just disappointed. Like, wow, this is nice to meet you. But like, that's just generally how we understand it. Like a general disappointment. And the mission then, as soon as very early on, we kind of get the idea that, okay, I get the mission. What we're supposed to do is, my goal is to get Jesus undisappointed with my life. So I'm just going to buckle down. I'm going to do better. I'm going to live as I ought to live. This is exactly what I ought to do. And so what generally happens when people do that, my experience, people experience shame about not being what they ought to be doing, not doing what they ought to do or whatever. And then they experience a kind of guilt that accompanies it because they're always falling short. And then as soon as they kind of live with the guilt long enough, they just resign themselves to continue what they were doing already because it's easier than trying to be whatever Jesus is calling us to be. Are you with me on this? This is, for a lot of us, this is our experience. I've disappointed Jesus already. I got to try to undisappoint him, and then I just kind of give up. This is how a lot of us find our way to do that. Now, let's be clear. Bible, Jesus, God, the Bible is concerned. Jesus is concerned about what you and I do. The Bible is concerned about what we do. Jesus is concerned about what we do. But maybe not like you thought. Maybe it's not like you thought. Check this out. This is Jesus in Matthew chapter 5. He says this about all of the doing the right stuff. Now notice this. So stay with me on the whole thing. If you just check out here, you're going to miss the whole thing. Here's what it is. Matthew 5:19. Anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands, so he's talking about all the biblical commands, which he said, look, I'm not here to destroy them. I'm here to fulfill them. And teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So really quickly on the kingdom of heaven, just way to think about it would be sort of like this. It's the participation of the life God intends us to have with God. So it's participation in the life with God. That's all that is. There's a lot more to it than that, but you get the idea, participation in life with God. So he says, anyone who doesn't do any of these commands, all of the 613 commands, all of them that are from the Hebrew scriptures, he's like, you got to do all of them, okay? Which is crazy. Then he says, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So whatever's there, imagine the most obedient person to all 613 commandments that they have in the Hebrew scriptures. Do all of that. That's what you should do. In fact, you should teach other people to do that so that you can have kind of this, as he describes it, that would be sort of this active participation in the life with God. And then it gets wild. It gets crazy because the people who are hearing him say this, if they had to picture a person who does this better than anybody else, it would belong to a category of people called the Pharisees. Okay, these are the most righteous people these people could have imagined. And then Jesus says in verse 20, check this out. For I tell you that unless your righteousness, your dikaiosune, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now he's like, look, you're not even going to be able to participate unless you're more righteous than the most obedient people. The Pharisees are people who not only do they obey this, or they're working overtime to obey all 613 of the laws in the Hebrew scriptures. They're also obeying what's called the oral law. There's all of this commentary on how the law ought to be followed and all this other stuff. And they've kind of said, we got to do all that stuff. And they're operating under the belief that the reason why the Romans have oppressed us and why our God's people are under this particular kind of oppression is because we're not righteous enough. So everybody do better and then God will rescue us. Now that's their prevailing belief. There's other things they believe. But Jesus is like, you got to surpass their version of what it means to do what you ought to do, which is amazing. But there's also something else going on. A couple chapters later, the Gospel of Matthew records Jesus saying this to a similar group, to the Pharisees, actually. He says this to the Pharisees. Notice the change. Or is there a change? Here's what he says. Matthew 23. Verse 27, woe, which means great sorrow. What sorrow? What sorrow to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Oh, wait a second, that's different. You hypocrites. You're like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. You look great on the outside, he says, and he calls them hypocrites. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness, which means what Jesus is talking about isn't just that are people doing all the right stuff on the outside, because we all know people who can fake it on the outside. Yeah, you know what they're called? Human beings. We all know people who can do that. We've all done it. And he's saying, look, it's not just enough to kind of live like a particular way, like as if all of these things are okay. Like there's something else going on here. And the question he's sort of elevating here, if at the one point he's saying, look, everybody live according to all of these laws. And then the other side is saying the people that live the most according to these laws are hypocrites. They're fakers. They're actors. The question he's sort of raising is this: how do we live within a moral framework without the kind of self-righteous hypocrisy that's connected to it? Like, is it possible to do that is the question. And again, this is a series. This next week will matter a lot, but really essentially what you're looking at is there's a transformation that Jesus is talking about in people that isn't just rooted in our ability to modify our own behavior. It's not just in like behavior modification, being scared enough to do the right thing. That's not what it all is, because we just talked about that. You end up with sort of shame and guilt and resignation, that sort of loop over and over again. So there's something else that he's talking about. And when the Bible is talking about how it is that we're transformed for a long time, it's not just everybody try harder, feel bad and try harder. It's something else. The Bible centers around something called the heart. Now, my own definition here, and there's lots of other things, layers to this for sure, so this isn't definitive, but it at least can give us an idea. The heart is the place from which desires get shaped and actions stem. I should also say that the heart is influenced by our desires and our actions as well. But the heart is the place from which our desires are shaped, our wants, our loves are shaped, and our actions stem. Again, James K. Smith, he says it this way: the heart is the seat and the fulcrum, the pivot point of the human person, the engine that drives our existence. We are lovers first and foremost. If we think about this in terms of the quest or journey or metaphor, we might say that the human heart is part compass and part internal guidance system. The heart is like a multifunctional desire device that is part engine and part homing beacon. If you look at the passage, we just talked about this over last week, you get some of this idea. Look, we talked about this last week, the idea of this homing beacon, all of our actions stemming from it. Look at this. We talked about this again last week. We said, look, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. All of our action stems from the heart. On the one hand, you get Jesus saying this. Jesus went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them from within, out of a person's heart. All of the stuff that's really not okay comes out from within us. The Hebrew scriptures say it this way in Jeremiah: the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Well, who can understand it? But then there's something that God promises to do. Notice this is what God does. So stay with me on this. If the heart is the center of all of our desire and action, here's what at least one sort of what God does, at least in one part of the Bible. He says this in Ezekiel chapter 36. I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I'll remove from you your heart of stone, meaning there's something broken or brittle, I should say this way, that's too hard to even have anything penetrated, to be changed. I'll remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh, and I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Pay attention to verse 27. And I will put my spirit in you. We'll talk about this next week. And move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Replacing the heart seems to be Jesus, or at least to be God's agenda here. Paul will talk about Jesus doing something similar here. Look at this in Colossians 3. Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, which we appear to have some kind of agency over our hearts to aim it at a particular thing. Your heart's on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. You see, there's something that if we go back to dikaiosune, we go back to the idea of righteousness, something about the heart ties it to the idea of righteousness. And one of the most common definitions, one of the most respected definitions of the word righteousness is this. It is one who is as one ought to be. To say it differently, it's not just simply saying it's one who acts as one ought to act, because that's important, and God does want us to act a particular way. I think the acting is the critical issue. It's not just simply how is it that we can get people to act as they ought to act. There's something else. The question is, I want to become the kind of person who, at least in my admission of a very sort of shallow, not that vulnerable idea of like, well, I guess it's pretty vulnerable. I was trying to eat trash. But I mean, in my own estimation, is how do I become the kind of person who isn't controlled by my wants? You with me? It's about becoming a kind of person. And the question is, how do I become that kind of person? How do I become that kind of person? Now, today, what I want to do is this. And again, we really have to come next week as we talk about this. But at least for today, all of us can admit, every single one of us, regardless of your own experience, understanding, belief, faith in Jesus or the Bible or anything else, every single one of us can all admit that I live differently than the way I intend. Because all of us, like we said, have moments of regret. All of us have had a situation where our wants have gotten control of us. Or at least they've influenced us or guided us, or we've been under the oppression of addiction is a perfect example where our wants are absolutely the master over us in some capacity for an ongoing period of time. But all of us have lived differently than we intended, and all of us want to be in a place where we control our wants versus being controlled by them. Because a person who is controlled exclusively by their wants is at risk of becoming a villain. So what do we do? Let's start with an admission. Just this simple admission. Some of my loves are disordered. Some of my loves are disordered. They're just not in the right place. They have more of their hand on the wheel than being a passenger or being in the back seat. They're much more guiding a lot more of my life than I intended them to do. The problem is, and again, we'll talk more about this next week. The problem is that we don't always know which ones are disordered because they feel right. And they're oftentimes aligned with our own best vision of our own future understanding of the best possible life, of what it looks like to sort of flourish. And so more often than not, we're like, I don't know if they may be a disorder, but they're kind of working out for me. And this is sort of the issue we're going to have. So let's just do this. First of all, again, discovering which ones are out of order goes back to that idea where we started with in Psalm 139, where David just prays, look, search me, God. I got to know if there's something in me that I don't even know if it's wrong, but will you just help me find it? Now, again, more on that next week, but at least for a moment, we want to kind of open ourselves up to that idea that maybe we aren't even aware of that stuff. So here's what I would do. Let's start with one of the best ways to indicate what your wants actually are and what they kind of look like, because we're trying to figure out which ones have a controlling kind of power over us. We want to start with this. Well, let's just start with what I'm already doing. And I want to ask the question, what is what I'm already doing in my life? The sort of stuff we talked about a little bit last week, the things that are kind of going on in my own life, the habits that I have, some of them unconscious. What does what I'm already doing tell me about what I really want? Meaning, there's a way in which you and I are already living that is the outflow of what we want, our deeper wants. We're already living kind of consistent with with our wants. And the question is like, let's at least put those in front of me once again. Not just what am I doing, kind of what am I doing, but more so how is it reflective of the wants that I have? So what is what I'm already doing? Tell me about what I really want. So is there a belief about some of these things that I have to have this to sustain me? Is there a belief that if I could get to this, it would answer a series of deep soul questions? If I could finally have this want sort of realized or satisfied, it would give me the life I'm longing for. In a lot of ways to think about it is, and I'll give you some examples in a second, but when we talk about all of the stuff that we really want, or the wants that are guiding us, or the wants we're even unaware of sometimes, they're actually kind of a fantasy fuel for my life. Where we craft a picture, again, of the life, our best possible, flourishing, kind of good life image, and we build our life around it. And we're disappointed when we don't get it, and we are fulfilled. We think if we could only have it. With me? So let me give you a couple examples. Do you find yourself, like perhaps as you're looking at your own life, with the amount of time, energy you're spending at different things, when you look at that, is there a particular kind of ambition that you have in your life? But by that I mean, are you working really, really hard for work or for school to get the grade, to get promoted, to prove something? Is there something beyond, like do you find yourself, some of your relationships being compromised by the amount of time that you're putting into your particular life, the way that you're living? What I want to try to present to you is maybe there's a part of you that's working so hard because you're longing for a particular kind of validation. You see, you might want to get, a leg up in your job or get into that college or whatever else that might look like. But really what you're wanting is a kind of validation. Do you have a kind of, maybe I'll ask you maybe another example. Do you have like an addiction? And maybe you don't call it addiction, it's a dependency, it's you dabble, but you kind of, you get there a lot. You go to those places and you're looking for something. And it isn't the addiction that you want. Nobody who is addicted to anything loves the object of their addiction. What they're looking for typically is a kind of relief, an escape. Is there a part of you that's seeking some of these things? Maybe it's a secret. And you despise that you keep going back to it, but you just can't. The reality itself is so hard, and you just need a way to find some relief. Maybe you find yourself fighting a lot with people that you care about, that are around you a lot. And maybe you're kind of finding yourself always kind of you're being threatened by a lot of people who have no intention of threatening you. Maybe there's an underlying jealousy or envy, and maybe there's a part of you that feels powerless. And maybe that's what you're longing for. You're trying to grab onto some vision of the future that has something to do with you feeling a little bit more in control, a little bit more power. Maybe as you're looking at what you're already doing and how it indicates what you really want, maybe what you're seeing is that you're actually an overly critical person. Maybe you're a person who finds yourself kind of always finding their way to be critical about lots of different things. This is where I kind of trip up a lot too, for sure. That I'm kind of a little bit more self-righteous. Like, look, I'm more, I pull myself together, and why can't these people? Why can't they? If I ever find myself doing that, really what I'm looking for down, and I may not even recognize it, what I'm looking for, I'm probably looking for a kind of justification for the things I don't want to admit that are in my life. What about you? They may not be heinous, horrible things, but they might actually be things that you're looking to get permission for. And so all the self-righteousness, at least this is for me, is generally just kind of me covering over stuff. What does what I'm already doing tell me about what I really want? Because all of us are longing to get to a place where our desires, our wants, don't have control over us, but we control them. Because none of us wants to be the villain in the story. None of us. One of the practices that the church has early on, it kind of adopts, is a group admission that our own hearts are in need of reshaping. It's literally a group confession that says, Jesus, there's a part of us that is still holding on to where our wants are having control over us, and we don't want that. We want to surrender that. We want to let that go. We want to be reshaped by you. And the confession action that the group takes, the sort of group admission, is called communion. It's the time in which everybody says, Jesus, here's who I am. Right now, I'm admitting that there's a part of me that's been broken, and I need you. My heart needs reshaping. And so this is why Jesus took bread, and he took the cup, and he said, whenever you eat this bread and you drink this cup, which were emblems, symbols of his own saving, rescuing work on the cross, not just for the things we did wrong, but for the condition itself of our own hearts to be renewed. And so in confession, we say, Jesus, this is who I am. I come to you in communion, with all of us admitting we got work to do, that we are someone who needs our hearts to be mended, to be changed. So before we go into that, would you pray with me? Jesus, we're so grateful that you want to mend our hearts, that it isn't just about cracking the whip and finding a way to do better under fear or threat, that it's really about your transformational love that meets us. And it is in the group confession where all of us admit, as we receive the bread and the cup, we're all admitting that we need you, that we cannot do it on our own, and that we're in need of transformation. So Jesus, as we do this now as a group, we confess together that we're not as we ought to be. Shape us, mold us, make us. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.